This is my true story. I tried to live my final years in peace, giving respect and asking for nothing but kindness, but instead I was mocked and humiliated in my own home. My stepson, the boy I had raised and supported, laughed at me for being old. He sneered at my trembling hands, my slow steps, my fading memory. Every laugh cut deeper than a knife, but what he didn't know was that I carried his secrets too. And one day, I decided to speak. Before I tell you how, comment where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. When I married again later in life, I knew it would not be easy. Blended families rarely are. My new wife came with her own child, a boy who carried the pride of youth in his eyes and the sharpness of resentment in his tone. He was not mine by blood, but from the very beginning I told myself blood did not matter. Loyalty, care, and sacrifice. Those were the things that built real family. So I stepped into his life with open arms. I tried to love him as I would my own, believing that one day he would look at me and see more than a stepfather. He would see a man who chose to care when he didn't have to. I worked harder than ever, even though age had begun to slow me down. My hands, rough with years of labor, still found the strength to pay for his schooling. I covered his tuition fees, bought him books, and made sure he had what he needed. I never wanted him to feel less than anyone else because of circumstance. When he was old enough to seek work, I used every connection I had left to help him. I called old friends, reached out to employers, and vouched for him personally, even when my own reputation was the only thing I had to offer. I wanted him to stand tall, to have a future that was secure. There were times he fell into trouble, debts from reckless choices, mistakes that could have followed him for years. Each time I stepped in, I sold pieces of my own savings, sometimes even pawning off small things I had kept from my first marriage. My heart ached parting with them, but I told myself the boy was worth it. His mistakes didn't define him, I believed. He was still young, still learning. I told myself my sacrifices would not be forgotten. I cooked for him, cleaned after him, and treated him no differently than I would have treated a son born of my own blood. I remember long nights when he came home hungry, and I would stay awake to make sure he had a warm plate waiting. I remember winters when he needed new clothes, and I went without new shoes just to buy them for him. I gave him a roof, I gave him stability, and most of all, I gave him my heart, because I believed that is what fathers, step or not, are supposed to do. In quiet moments, I dreamed that one day he would sit beside me, place his hand on mine and say, "You are my father in every way that matters." I dreamed that in my old age, he would protect me as I had protected him. I dreamed that my efforts would plant seeds of love that would grow into respect. That was my hope. That was the promise I carried in my chest every time I opened my wallet, every time I swallowed my exhaustion, every time I gave a piece of myself to him without asking for anything back. I believed in loyalty more than blood. But I was wrong. Disrespect does not arrive suddenly. It begins as small cuts, little words meant to sting, glances that dismiss, laughter that feels sharper than knives. At first, I told myself not to notice, that he was just young, that his words carried no real meaning. But soon it became clear. It was not youth speaking, it was contempt. My stepson, the boy I had fed, clothed, and carried through his troubles, began to mock me openly. He no longer saw me as the man who sacrificed for him. He saw me only as an old man, slow and fragile, someone he could laugh at without consequence. He started with little things. He would roll his eyes when I forgot something small, like where I put my glasses or when I repeated myself in a story. He would laugh under his breath when my knees creaked as I stood up from a chair. He would mutter words like old man and slow in front of his friends, thinking I didn't hear. But I did. Every word landed heavy in my chest. I wanted to believe it was just immaturity, that he would grow out of it. But instead of growing out of it, the disrespect grew louder, bolder. Soon he no longer whispered his insults. He laughed loudly at the tremble in my hands when I tried to hold a cup. He called me useless when I struggled with chores I once did with ease. He joked that I was closer to the grave than to being helpful. His friends laughed with him, their mocking eyes watching me shrink in silence. I carried the humiliation alone, my heart breaking as I realized my kindness had not built respect in him, only arrogance. What hurt the most was not the words themselves, but the way he said them. There was no hesitation, no shame, no awareness that he was cutting into me. He looked at me, not as the man who had carried him through his failures, but as an object of ridicule. To him, I was not a stepfather deserving gratitude. I was entertainment. My pain was his laughter. My age was his excuse to treat me like nothing. And others noticed. Relatives who once admired my patience with him began to look away awkwardly when he insulted me in gatherings. Neighbors who saw his behavior whispered quietly about how cruel he had become. I heard the whispers, but I stayed silent. Not because I was weak, but because I still believed, foolishly, that he might change, that he might one day realize the shame of his actions. But the more silent I was, the bolder he became. Each insult chipped away at the bond I thought we had. Each laugh reminded me that the sacrifices I made were invisible to him. And each day I lived in that house, I carried humiliation on my shoulders like a heavy cloak, knowing that the boy I raised now looked at me as if I was nothing more than a punchline to his cruel jokes. Humiliation has many faces, but the one I will never forget happened at the dinner table. It was a simple evening, the kind of night where families are supposed to gather, share food, and share warmth. The plates were set, the smell of rice and curry filled the room, and I sat quietly in my chair, grateful to at least still share a meal under the same roof. My hands, however, were not what they used to be. Age had taken their steadiness. As I reached for my fork, my fingers betrayed me, trembling, and the fork slipped from my grip. The sound of metal striking the floor echoed louder than it should have, cutting into the silence of the room. For a moment, everything froze. My heart sank as all eyes turned toward me. I bent slowly to pick up the fork, my back aching, my face burning with shame. It was such a small mistake, but in that moment, it felt like the whole world was watching. Before I could lift my head, his laughter broke the silence. Loud, cruel, sharp. My stepson leaned back in his chair, grinning as if he had just witnessed the funniest thing in his life. Then, with his voice dripping in arrogance, he said, "What good are you now? Just an old man waiting to die." The words sliced through me like a knife. I froze, fork still in my hand, my chest tight as if the air itself had been stolen. Around the table, others shifted uncomfortably. Some lowered their eyes, some forced nervous smiles, but no one spoke. No one defended me. The only sound was his laughter, filling the room, drowning out my dignity. My cheeks burned hot, not from anger, but from humiliation so deep it made me feel smaller than I had ever felt in my life. I lowered my eyes, trying to hide the pain on my face. I pushed the food around my plate, forcing myself to chew, even though my throat felt closed. Each bite tasted bitter, each laugh of his echoing in my ears long after the moment had passed. I wanted to scream, to tell him how cruel he was, to remind him of all the nights I had gone hungry so he could eat, all the mornings I had worked with blistered hands to pay for his comfort. But my voice would not rise. My silence was all I had left. That night, as I lay in bed, the words replayed again and again. Just an old man waiting to die. I stared at the ceiling, tears filling my eyes, wondering how my life had come to this. I had spent years giving, sacrificing, loving. I had treated him as my own blood, never once reminding him that he was not. And yet, this was what I received in return. Laughter at my weakness, cruelty at my expense. My heart ached not only with sorrow, but with betrayal. It was one thing to be forgotten. It was another to be mocked for existing. That dinner marked the breaking point. Humiliation no longer felt like something I could swallow quietly. His words carved themselves into my memory, a reminder that kindness to the ungrateful is wasted breath. That night, as I cried silently into my pillow, I knew something inside me had shifted. I was no longer simply hurt. I was determined. The man who laughed at my age had forgotten that I carried truths about him, truths that could strip away his mask in front of everyone. He thought I was powerless. He thought my trembling hands meant I could no longer fight back. But he was wrong. That night, after the dinner table humiliation, I retreated to my small room, closing the door softly so no one could hear how broken I felt inside. I sat on the edge of my bed, the shadows of the room pressing in around me, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to cry. My tears were not just for the cruel words spoken to me. They were for the years of effort, sacrifice, and kindness that had been forgotten, erased, treated like they were worth nothing. I remembered the countless nights I stayed up late cooking for him, the mornings I walked miles just to buy his school supplies, the hours I spent working jobs that drained the life from me so that he could have opportunities I never had. All those moments replayed in my mind, but instead of gratitude, all I could hear was his laugh echoing, just an old man waiting to die. I thought back to the times I had bailed him out of trouble. There were moments when his reckless spending had left him drowning in debt, and I quietly sold parts of my savings to cover the costs. I remembered the day he was nearly thrown out of his job, and I used my old contacts, swallowing my pride, to convince his employer to give him another chance. I never told anyone what I had done. I carried his burdens in silence because I believed family meant carrying one another's shame. Yet here I was, carrying humiliation alone, while he flaunted his arrogance at my expense. The reflection cut deep. It was not just about this one cruel remark at dinner. It was about a lifetime of me giving and him taking. It was about me treating him as blood and him treating me as nothing. My kindness had not made him better. It had made him entitled. And in that quiet room, with tears still wet on my cheeks, I asked myself the question I had avoided for years. Why was I protecting him? Why was I still shielding his secrets while he openly mocked me? Because I knew his secrets. I knew the things he had done that would make his perfect image crumble if anyone else found out. I knew how he lied to his wife about where he went at night. I knew about the money he stole from relatives when they trusted him with their accounts. I knew how cruel he had been to people behind closed doors while smiling in public. I had kept silent all these years, telling myself it was for the sake of the family, that exposing him would only cause pain. But now I realized my silence was not protecting the family. It was protecting his mask, and he wore that mask while spitting on me. That night, my reflection turned into a resolve I had never felt before. My age did not make me powerless. My silence did not make me weak. In fact, my silence had given me power. I carried truths he thought were buried, truths that could change how everyone saw him. He believed I was a burden, a useless old man. But I held in my hands the one thing he could never fight against, the truth of who he really was. As I lay down on my bed, staring at the ceiling with dry eyes, I made a promise to myself. I would not carry his secrets any longer. I would not let his cruelty go unanswered. If he thought mocking me gave him strength, then I would remind him where real strength lies, not in arrogance, not in youth, but in the quiet power of truth. My reflection had shown me the truth of my life. I had been too loyal, too forgiving, too silent. That would change. The man who laughed at me would soon feel the weight of every truth he thought would never see the light of day. As I sat in my room that night, the humiliation still burning inside me, my mind began to wander back over the years. Memories came rushing in, not of kindness from him, but of the things I had seen him do when he thought no one was watching. Acts that revealed who he truly was beneath the polished mask he wore for the world. I had stayed silent about those things for far too long, convincing myself that family meant covering up shame. But now, with his laughter still echoing in my ears, I knew silence was no longer strength. It was weakness. I remembered the time he stole money from his cousin. It was a family gathering, and everyone trusted him to hold the envelope that contained the contributions for a wedding gift. When it came time to hand it over, the envelope was lighter, the money missing. Whispers circled, but he stood there with a straight face, blaming it on a miscount. I saw the guilt in his eyes, the way he avoided my stare. I knew the truth, but I said nothing. I thought protecting the family's image was more important than exposing him. There was another time, darker still, when I saw him lie to his wife. He told her he was working late, but I knew where he went. I had seen him slip into places a married man should never be. I said nothing, thinking it was not my place, thinking maybe he would change, but every lie he told her piled up like stones, and I carried the weight of knowing, even though I never spoke it aloud. I remembered the way he treated people beneath him, waiters, workers, neighbors. He spoke to them with arrogance, belittling them as if they were nothing, while smiling sweetly in front of others to keep his image polished. I saw it again and again. He was cruel when he thought no one who mattered was watching, but I was always watching, and I never forgot. Then there were the debts. His reckless spending, his late-night gambling, his borrowing from friends he never repaid. Each time I quietly stepped in, covering the holes he dug for himself, convincing others to forgive him. I told myself I was protecting him, teaching him, guiding him. But the truth was, I was enabling him. And instead of growing into a man who respected me for it, he grew into a man who laughed at me, forgetting the countless times I had saved him from collapse. These secret acts were not accidents. They were choices. Choices that revealed his true character. Choices that he thought would stay hidden forever. He lived with arrogance because he believed no one would ever dare to speak against him. And for years, he was right, because I stayed silent. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought love meant carrying someone's sins quietly. But I see now, love without accountability is not love at all. It is surrender. The night of my humiliation, when he laughed at me for being old, I realized something powerful. I had given him too much power by guarding his secrets. He mocked me because he thought I had nothing left to fight with. But I did. I had truth. The truth of what I had seen, the truth of what I had carried, the truth of the man he really was behind his mask. And that truth was worth more than any insult, stronger than any laugh. So as I sat there reflecting, I began to see his secrets differently. They were no longer chains tying me down. They were weapons. Weapons he himself had forged through his lies, his cruelty, his selfishness. And now, those weapons were in my hands. The same man who laughed at my trembling hands would soon learn that those hands still held the power to tear down the mask he had worn for years. The night after my reflection, when I lay staring at the ceiling in the quiet of my small room, the anger inside me began to harden into something sharper, something colder. A plan. For years I had allowed myself to be the shield, covering up his mistakes, carrying his lies, swallowing humiliation for the sake of keeping peace. But now I saw peace for what it was. Silence forced upon me while he laughed. Peace was not silence. Peace was dignity. And if I wanted my dignity back, I needed to take action. I could no longer be the old man mocked at the table. I had to become the voice that spoke the truth. The plan was simple, but its power lay in its simplicity. He thought he had built a fortress around himself, guarded by charm and false respect from relatives, in-laws, and friends. To them, he was the perfect husband, the hard-working man, the pillar of the family. But I held the stones of truth, each one capable of shattering the illusion he wore so proudly. All I had to do was choose the right moment and the right people to hear it. And that choice was obvious. His family, his wife's side, his in-laws, the very people who had always defended him blindly. They saw me as weak, as old, because that was the story he told them. I would give them a different story, the truth. I began gathering proof. I opened old drawers and boxes where I had kept fragments of the past, pieces I once told myself I would never use, receipts from nights he claimed to be working, but was instead spending money elsewhere, notes of debts I had repaid on his behalf, letters from angry relatives asking for money he had borrowed and never returned. I wrote down the details, every incident I remembered, every name, every date, so that no word I spoke could be dismissed as exaggeration. The more I wrote, the heavier the folder grew. But with every page, my spirit grew lighter. I was no longer carrying his shame. I was preparing to release it. The plan did not come from hate, it came from clarity. I realized that as long as I remained silent, he would continue to grow arrogant, continue to treat me like nothing, continue to laugh at my age while hiding behind the mask of respectability. The only way to end it was to tear the mask away. Not with anger, not with fists, but with truth. Truth is heavier than any insult. Truth leaves no room for laughter. I rehearsed the call in my mind. I pictured the moment I would dial the numbers of his in-laws, the way my voice would stay calm, steady, undeniable. I would not shout. I would not beg. I would simply tell them what I had seen with my own eyes, what I had carried in silence for years. I would tell them about the lies he told his wife, about the money he stole, about the cruelty he showed when no one was watching. And when I was finished, I would say the only sentence that mattered. This is the man you defend while he laughs at me. As I finalized my plan, a calmness settled over me that I had not felt in years. For so long I thought I had no power left, that old age had taken everything from me. But the truth was, power does not lie in youth or strength. Power lies in the courage to speak when silence has been demanded of you. And I was ready to speak. The man who thought my voice was gone would soon learn that it was louder than ever. The morning I chose to make the call felt different from every other morning. The sun rose the same, the air outside carried the same coolness, but inside my chest there was a weight and a fire. For years I had kept quiet, convincing myself that silence was the noble path. But as I sat at the small wooden table in my room, the folder of evidence beside me, I realized silence had not protected me. It had only fed his arrogance. The phone sat waiting, silent, as if daring me to pick it up. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the knowledge that what I was about to do would change everything. I dialed the first number, his wife's parents. They had always defended him, always believed his stories, always treated me like the bitter old man who should be grateful for scraps of respect. When they answered, I kept my voice calm. No anger, no shouting, no trembling. Just truth. I told them about the nights he lied, claiming to work late while his money slipped into places no husband should go. I told them about the debts he created, the lies he spun, the cruelty he showed when the doors were closed. I read from the papers in front of me. Dates, amounts, receipts, undeniable details. The silence on the other end grew heavier with every word I spoke. By the time I finished, the voice that answered was not defensive. It was broken. Then I dialed the numbers of his cousins, his uncles, his so-called friends. One by one, I repeated the truth, always calm, always steady. I laid out the things he thought were buried, the money he borrowed and never repaid, the promises he broke, the cruel laughter he directed at those weaker than him. I did not exaggerate. I did not twist the facts. I simply spoke what I had seen, what I had carried, what he had hidden. The reaction was always the same. Silence first, then shock, then anger. Not at me, but at him. The perfect image he had painted was collapsing with each call. The last call I made was the hardest, to his wife. She had always believed his mask, always looked at me with suspicion when he told her stories about how difficult I was. When she answered, I took a deep breath and began. I told her what I had seen with my own eyes, the lies he had fed her, the places he had gone when he claimed to be at work, the people he had hurt while pretending to be faithful. I could hear her breathing grow heavy, her silence breaking into sobs as I spoke. When I finished, I said only one thing. This is the man who laughs at me for being old, while he hides behind lies in front of you. I ended the call, my heart pounding, but my spirit lighter than it had ever been. When the phone finally went silent again, I leaned back in my chair, the weight of years lifting off my shoulders. I had not shouted. I had not begged. I had simply spoken the truth. And truth has a power no insult can erase. My stepson thought my age made me weak, but he had forgotten that old age carries memory. and memory carries truth. And now, that truth was no longer mine to carry alone. It belonged to everyone. Fallout is not gentle. It does not whisper. It arrives like a storm that no one can stop, and once it begins, it spreads into every corner. After I made the calls, after I placed the truth into the ears of those who once defended him blindly, I knew it was only a matter of time before the walls he built around himself began to fall. And fall they did. Word spread through the family like fire running across dry grass. The perfect image he wore, the image of a hard-working man, a loyal husband, a pillar of the family, began to collapse, piece by piece, until nothing was left but the naked truth. His wife's parents were the first to react. For years, they had believed everything he said, had treated me like the bitter old man he claimed I was. But now, they had heard my words, seen the evidence, and they could not deny it. They confronted him, their voices filled with anger and betrayal. They demanded answers, demanded explanations for the money gone, for the lies told, for the nights spent in places he had sworn he never visited. He tried to shout, he tried to twist the truth, but every denial only deepened their fury. The cracks in his mask had grown too wide to hide. Then his wife turned on him. She had always looked at me with suspicion, her trust in him blinding her to the truth I carried. But when she heard the details, the dates, the receipts, the undeniable proof, her heart broke. She confronted him with trembling hands, with tears that turned into rage. Neighbors said they could hear the shouting from outside the house. "How could you?" she screamed. "How long have you been lying to me?" His mask of confidence, the arrogance he once wore like armor, shattered in that moment. His excuses fell flat, his stories crumbled, and the man who once laughed at me now stood humiliated in front of the woman he had betrayed. Relatives joined in too. Calls came pouring in, voices demanding answers, cousins and uncles asking if what they heard was true. And each time he tried to defend himself, but the truth was heavier than his words. The silence in those conversations grew louder than anything he could say. They no longer saw him as the proud, untouchable man he pretended to be. They saw him for what he was, a fraud, a liar, a man who built his life on the backs of others while laughing at the very people who had saved him. At home, the air around him grew colder. His wife no longer looked at him with trust. His children no longer looked at him with admiration. The house that once echoed with his arrogant laughter now carried only tension, silence, and shame. He could not escape it. Every room reminded him of the lies that had been exposed. Every glance reminded him of the respect he had lost. He was trapped, not by me, but by his own actions. And me? I sat quietly, watching from a distance. I did not need to shout or gloat. I had spoken once, and that was enough. The truth did the rest. For years, I had been the one humiliated, the one mocked, the one made to feel like a burden. Now the roles had reversed. He was the one carrying shame. He was the one mocked in whispers. He was the one forced to live in the shadow of his own cruelty. That was the fallout. It was not loud in my house, but it was loud in his. It was not my burden anymore. It was his. The man who once sneered at me for being old now woke each day to the wreckage of his own lies. And that, I realized, was justice taking its course. The aftermath of truth is different from the moment of truth. The moment is sharp, sudden, like a blade cutting through years of lies. The aftermath is slower, heavier, like the echo of thunder long after the storm has passed. When the fallout had spread and the dust began to settle, I saw the shape of what remained. My stepson, the man who once laughed at me for being old and weak, no longer walked with pride. His shoulders bent under the weight of shame. His voice no longer carried the arrogance it once did. His eyes, once filled with mockery whenever they met mine, now avoided me completely. He had become a man afraid of his own reflection because his reflection no longer lied to him. He came to me one afternoon, storming into my room, his face red, his fists clenched. He shouted, accusing me of betrayal, accusing me of destroying his life. "Why would you do this to me?" he asked, his voice trembling with fury. I sat there quietly, letting his anger spill into the air. When he finally stopped, panting and waiting for my defense, I gave him none. I looked him in the eyes and spoke only one line. I did not destroy your life. I destroyed your mask. The truth destroyed you. His rage faltered in that instant. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavier than his shouting had ever been. He had no answer because deep down he knew I was right. The aftermath spread to his family as well. His wife, who had once believed every lie, now kept her distance. The laughter that once filled their home was gone, replaced by cold silence and bitter arguments. His children no longer looked up to him with wide-eyed admiration. They had heard the whispers, they had seen the tension, they had felt the change. And though they were young, even they began to sense that the man they called father was not the man he pretended to be. The respect he craved most was slipping through his fingers, replaced by doubt and disappointment. Relatives who once defended him now avoided him. At gatherings, the air grew tense when he walked in. Conversations stopped. Eyes shifted. The man who once basked in admiration now carried the weight of shame on his back everywhere he went. And he knew it. Each day, the humiliation I had once endured became his. Each day, the silence I had carried now surrounded him. That was the true aftermath. Not explosive, not loud, but quiet, suffocating, relentless. As for me, I did not feel joy in his downfall. I did not laugh at his misery the way he had laughed at mine. My heart did not celebrate cruelty. What I felt was peace. Peace in knowing I no longer carried his secrets. Peace in knowing I had restored my dignity. Peace in knowing that truth had finally spoken louder than lies. For the first time in years, I ate my meals without shame burning in my chest. For the first time, I walked through my own house without feeling like a ghost. I was no longer the old man mocked into silence. I was the man who spoke when it mattered most. The aftermath taught me something important. Silence can keep peace for a while, but it cannot keep dignity. And without dignity, there is no peace at all. By breaking my silence, I did not destroy the family. I saved it from living under the weight of lies. Those who still respected me came closer, offering kind words and quiet support. They saw me not as weak, but as strong, because strength is not measured in fists or youth. Strength is measured in the courage to speak truth, even when it costs you everything. And so, I did not see myself as broken anymore. I saw myself as free. Free from his cruelty, free from his laughter, free from the chains of secrets that never belonged to me in the first place. That freedom was my justice, and no one could take it away. Justice does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes softly, like the stillness after a storm, where everything broken lies in plain sight and no one can pretend anymore. That was my justice. For years, I had lived under the weight of humiliation, carrying his secrets while he laughed at me, treating me as though my years and my trembling hands made me worthless. He thought age had stolen my power, but age had given me something far greater than strength. It had given me memory, and memory became the sword I finally chose to draw. When I exposed his deeds to the very family that once admired him, I restored what he tried to take from me, dignity. That was justice. In the days that followed, I noticed the change everywhere. No one looked at me with pity anymore. They looked at me with respect. Relatives came quietly to my side, some offering words of apology for the times they believed his lies, others simply sitting with me in silence, their presence saying more than words ever could. I felt their support, their understanding, and most of all, I felt my place in the family restored. No longer was I the old man sitting forgotten in the corner. I was the truth-teller, the one who had courage when silence seemed easier. My stepson, on the other hand, carried the opposite fate. The same people who once cheered his name now avoided him. His arrogance had crumbled, his laughter silenced, his pride stripped bare. He walked with his head down, no longer able to meet the eyes of the people he had fooled for so long. His wife treated him with suspicion, his children with doubt, his relatives with cold distance. The empire of lies he built had collapsed, not because of me, but because truth had finally caught up to him. That too was justice. But justice for me was not about watching him suffer. It was about reclaiming what I had lost. I no longer ate meals with shame burning in my chest. I no longer walked through the house feeling invisible. I no longer cried silently in the dark, carrying secrets that were never mine to protect. I sat with my head high, knowing I had spoken when it mattered most. I had chosen dignity over silence, truth over humiliation, courage over fear. That is justice. As the days turned into months, I found a peace I had not felt in years. My nights were no longer haunted by his laughter. My mornings were no longer filled with dread of what insult might come next. Instead, I lived quietly, simply, with the comfort of knowing I had taken back my voice. When I looked in the mirror, I no longer saw a broken man mocked by his own family. I saw a survivor, a fighter, an old man who refused to be erased. And that reflection gave me strength. I know now that age is not weakness. Age is the proof of survival. It is the record of battles fought, sacrifices made, and truths carried. He tried to make my age a weapon against me, but in the end, my age was the very thing that gave me the power to end his lies. My justice was not loud, but it was final. He may still walk this earth, but he will never again laugh at me with power in his voice. That power is gone. It belongs to me now. In my final years, I no longer seek revenge. I seek peace. And peace, for me, came the day I exposed his secrets. The day I showed him that the old man he mocked still had the strength to take everything from him with a single truth. My justice was not in making him fall. My justice was in standing tall again. Final thought. He laughed at me for being old. Now the whole family laughs at him for being a fraud. And that is all the justice I needed.